April 14, 1945, the Harz Mountains, Germany. 16-year-old Private James Jimmy Caldwell crouches behind a shattered stone wall, his hands trembling as artillery shells scream overhead. 3 weeks ago, he was plowing fields in rural Kentucky. Now he's running reconnaissance for the 83rd Infantry Division, separated from his unit, alone in enemy territory. The morning fog clings to the pine trees like smoke. Jimmy's canteen is empty. His rifle, a Springfield M1903 he barely knows how to fire, feels like dead weight in his arms. He's lost, completely hopelessly lost, behind German lines with no map, no radio, and no idea which direction leads back to safety. What Jimmy doesn't know is that less than a mile away, General Major Heinrich von Schellenberg is making a desperate decision that will change both their fates forever. The 58-year-old commander of the 416th Infantry Division has just received orders to withdraw east. But von Schellenberg, a career officer who served in the Imperial German Army during the Great War, refuses to abandon his remaining men to the advancing Americans. He's traveling in a civilian Mercedes with only his aide, hoping to reach the scattered remnants of his division before the Americans close the pocket. The statistics are staggering. By April 1945, the Wehrmacht is collapsing. Over 300,000 German soldiers will surrender in the Ruhr pocket alone. The average age of German defenders has dropped to 17. Meanwhile, American forces are advancing 50 miles per day, capturing entire divisions before they can regroup. Intelligence estimates suggest senior German commanders are fleeing east or attempting suicide rather than face capture. But Jimmy Caldwell knows none of this. He only knows he's cold, terrified, and certain he's going to die in these God-forsaken mountains. The Army recruitment sergeant in Louisville never asked too many questions when Jimmy showed him a forged birth certificate claiming he was 18. At 5'9" and 160 pounds, with a deep voice and desperate determination, Jimmy looked old enough. His father had died at Pearl Harbor. His mother couldn't afford to keep the farm running alone. Jimmy did what thousands of other American boys did in 1944. He lied about his age and went to war. What he didn't know was that within the next 3 hours, this 16-year-old farm boy would accidentally capture one of the highest-ranking German officers, taken alive in the final weeks of the European War, and the entire operation would begin with a stolen chicken. To understand how a child ended up behind enemy lines capturing generals, you need to understand America's manpower crisis in late 1944. The failed solutions, the desperate measures, and why the military was willing to look the other way when teenagers forged documents and lied their way into combat. By the autumn of 1944, the U.S. Army needed bodies fast. The Battle of the Bulge alone would consume 89,000 American casualties in 6 weeks. Replacement training programs were shortened from 17 weeks to just 13. Quality control declined dramatically. According to Army records, an estimated 200,000 underage Americans served in World War II, with at least 2,000 under the age of 16. The military's official stance was zero tolerance for fraudulent enlistment. The reality on the ground was entirely different. Recruitment sergeants faced quotas. Local draft boards looked the other way. Training officers, desperate for warm bodies to fill depleted companies, ignored obvious discrepancies in paperwork. One sergeant later admitted, if a boy was tall enough, strong enough, and brave enough to lie about his age, he was probably tough enough to fight. The consequences were predictable and tragic. Boys as young as 12 served on Navy vessels. 14-year-olds flew bombing missions over Germany. 15-year-olds died in foxholes in France. Calvin Graham, who enlisted in the Navy at 12, was wounded at Guadalcanal and later dishonorably discharged when his mother discovered where he was. Jack Lucas, who joined the Marines at 14 by forging his mother's signature, would earn the Medal of Honor at 17 and become the youngest recipient since the Civil War. But most underage soldiers never made headlines. They simply disappeared into the massive machinery of war, one more serial number in a division of 15,000 men. Jimmy Caldwell was one of these invisible children assigned to Baker Company, 330th Infantry Regiment, after completing just 9 weeks of training at Camp Breckinridge, Kentucky. The expert consensus in early 1945 was that the war would continue into 1946. Intelligence projections suggested Germany would mount a fanatical last stand in the Bavarian Alps, the mythical Alpine redoubt where SS divisions would fight to the last man. Casualty estimates for conquering this fortress ranged from 500,000 to 1 million Allied dead. The stakes couldn't be higher. Every day the war continued meant more concentration camp prisoners dying, more cities firebombed, more soldiers killed. The pressure to advance meant reconnaissance patrols pushed deeper behind enemy lines with less support. Young soldiers like Jimmy Caldwell were sent on missions that would have required full platoons in 1942, but by April 1945, there simply weren't enough experienced troops to go around. The failed solutions were numerous. The Army tried using specially trained scout dogs. They failed in the dense German forests. They attempted aerial reconnaissance. Cloud cover made it useless. They deployed OSS operatives. Too few spread too thin, so they sent teenagers with 3 months training into the unknown and hoped for the best. On April 13, 1945, Jimmy's squad, 8 exhausted men led by a 21-year-old corporal named Davis, received orders to scout a road junction 5 miles east of their current position. Intelligence believed it was undefended. Intelligence was wrong. A German rearguard unit ambushed them at dawn. Jimmy, bringing up the rear, was the only one who escaped into the forest. Now, 24 hours later, he's alone, starving, lost, and about to stumble into an encounter that military historians will later call one of the most improbable captures of the war. What Jimmy needs is food. What he's about to find is glory, and a German general who never imagined his war would end at the hands of a child. James Robert Caldwell was born on February 3, 1929 in Harlan County, Kentucky. Coal country, tobacco country, poverty country. His father, Robert, worked at the Ford plant in Louisville. His mother, Sarah, kept a small farm outside town. Jimmy had no military pedigree, no family tradition of service, no tactical training beyond what he absorbed in 9 chaotic weeks at Camp Breckinridge. What Jimmy had was something the Army couldn't teach and couldn't measure: a farmer's patience, a hunter's instinct for reading terrain, and the desperate resourcefulness that comes from growing up poor during the Great Depression. The moment of insight comes on the morning of April 14th, when Jimmy spots smoke rising from a farmhouse chimney about a quarter mile through the trees. His stomach is eating itself. He hasn't eaten since yesterday's cold rations. The Army Survival Manual says to avoid civilian contact behind enemy lines, but the manual was written by officers who'd never gone 36 hours without food while running for their lives through enemy territory. Jimmy makes a decision. He'll approach the farmhouse, find food, and try to determine where the hell he actually is. He strips off his helmet, too obviously American, and buries it under leaves. He rolls up his uniform sleeves to hide the insignia. At a distance, in the morning fog, he might pass for a German soldier. Maybe, if the occupants don't look too closely. He moves through the forest using techniques learned not in basic training, but from hunting squirrels in Kentucky. Wait on the back foot. Test each step before committing. Stay in the shadows. It takes him 20 minutes to cover 200 yards. When he reaches the edge of the tree line, He observes the farmhouse for a full 10 minutes before moving. There's a black Mercedes parked in the yard. Expensive, civilian plates. Two men in Wehrmacht gray-green uniforms are unloading luggage from the trunk. The older one wears a long leather coat. The younger, maybe 25, carries a pistol on his belt. Jimmy's heart hammers. These aren't farmers. These are German officers. Senior ones, judging by their bearing and the quality of their vehicle. The smart play is to retreat. Report what he's seen if he ever makes it back to American lines. But then Jimmy sees it, through the farmhouse window, hanging from a hook in the kitchen, a chicken, a fat, beautiful, cooked chicken, probably left by the fleeing farmhouse occupants. The insight that crosses Jimmy's 16-year-old mind isn't tactical genius, it isn't strategic brilliance, it's pure, desperate hunger meeting opportunity. If he waits until the Germans go inside, he can sneak through the back door, grab the chicken, and disappear into the forest before anyone notices. It's a stupid plan, a crazy plan, the kind of plan only a starving teenager would conceive. But Jimmy Caldwell, who has spent the last 36 hours certain he was going to die alone in these mountains, decides that if he's going to die anyway, he might as well die with a full stomach. He has no idea he's about to accidentally capture General Major Heinrich von Schellenberg and make military history in the process. The execution of Jimmy's plan, if you can call it that, begins at 09:20 hours on April 14th, 1945. He watches the two German officers carry the last of their luggage inside. Through the window, he sees them moving toward the front room. The kitchen is temporarily empty. This is it. This is his chance. Jimmy circles around the back of the farmhouse, moving in a low crouch, rifle slung over his shoulder. The back door is old, wooden, slightly ajar. He eases it open. The hinges creak. Jesus Christ, the hinges creak, but he hears voices from the front room, raised in discussion, covering the sound. He slips inside. The kitchen smells like heaven. Real food, cooked meat. His vision actually blurs with hunger. The chicken hangs right there, not 10 feet away, still warm. He reaches for it with shaking hands. That's when the younger German officer walks back into the kitchen. For one frozen moment, neither man moves. The German's hand drops toward his holster. Jimmy's hand is literally touching the chicken. Their eyes meet. Jimmy sees the officer's pupils dilate with recognition. American uniform, American boots, American rifle. What happens next occurs in seconds but feels like hours. The German's pistol clears the holster. Jimmy does the only thing his panicked brain can conceive. He grabs the hot chicken with both hands and throws it directly at the officer's face. The chicken impacts with a wet slap. Grease and skin splatter across the German's eyes. He stumbles backward, blinded, and Jimmy rushes forward, not attacking, just trying to get past him to the door. They collide. Both men fall. Jimmy lands on top. His elbow catches the German in the throat, completely by accident, and the man makes a horrible choking sound, gasping for air. Jimmy scrambles up, grabs his rifle, and swings it around. The German is on his hands and knees, coughing, chicken grease dripping down his face, tears streaming from his eyes. Jimmy points the rifle at him, hands shaking so badly he can barely keep the barrel steady. "Don't move," Jimmy shouts in English. Then, remembering one of the 3 German phrases from his training, "Hände hoch," hands up. The German slowly raises his hands, still coughing, looking at Jimmy with an expression somewhere between shock and humiliation. He's been disarmed with a chicken. By a child. That's when the older officer appears in the kitchen doorway. General Major Heinrich von Schellenberg, wearing his long leather coat and decades of military bearing, stops cold when he sees the scene. His aide on the floor, covered in chicken grease, hands raised. A boy, and von Schellenberg can immediately see this is just a boy, pointing a rifle with the wide-eyed terror of someone who has no idea what he's doing. "Got him, Himmel," von Schellenberg says quietly. God in heaven. Jimmy swings the rifle toward him. "Hands up, both of you! Hände hoch!" Von Schellenberg, who commanded a regiment at Verdun in 1916, who received the Iron Cross First Class from the Kaiser himself, who has fought in 2 world wars and commanded thousands of men, slowly raises his hands above his head. He's being captured by a child. With a chicken. This, von Schellenberg mutters in German, is completely absurd. For the next 45 minutes, Jimmy Caldwell holds 2 German officers at gunpoint in a farmhouse kitchen while having absolutely no idea what to do next. His plan, such as it was, ended at get chicken. He never got to the capture senior Wehrmacht officers phase, because that was never supposed to happen. The aide, Hauptmann Werner Schultz, continues wiping chicken grease from his face, looking at Jimmy with undisguised fury. Von Schellenberg, in contrast, remains calm, almost curious. He studies this American boy soldier with the analytical eye of a career military officer. "How old are you?" von Schellenberg asks, in perfect Oxford-accented English. Jimmy, surprised the German speaks English, blurts out, 18. Von Schellenberg's eyebrow rises. "Try again." 16. The admission escapes before Jimmy can stop it. The general nods slowly. "And you are alone." Jimmy desperately wants to lie, to claim his entire platoon is surrounding the house, but something about the old man's steady gaze makes deception impossible. "Yes, sir." "Mein Gott," Schultz mutters. "We're being captured by a baby who doesn't even know where his own army is." Von Schellenberg shoots his aide a sharp look, then turns back to Jimmy. "What is your plan, young man?" Jimmy's plan, formulated in real-time panic, is to march them both west until they run into American lines, assuming he can figure out which direction is west. He uses the Mercedes compass, orders both Germans to walk ahead of him, and they begin a surreal trek through the German countryside. They walk for 2 hours. Von Schellenberg sets a measured pace, occasionally pointing out easier paths. Schultz mutters continuous complaints in German. Jimmy, carrying his rifle at the ready, tries to project confidence he absolutely doesn't feel. They pass through abandoned German positions, avoid one patrol in the distance, and cross a stream using a fallen log. At 14:30 hours, they crest a hill, and Jimmy sees the most beautiful sight of his life. American tanks, a column of Shermans from the 83rd Division's armored elements, advancing east. He nearly weeps with relief. What happens next, however, is where things get complicated. Jimmy marches his prisoners down the hill toward the American lines. Sentries challenge them. Jimmy shouts his identification. Soldiers stare in disbelief as this mud-covered, exhausted teenage private emerges from the forest with 2 German officers in tow. They're brought to the battalion command post. Major Robert Thornton, the battalion executive officer, conducts the initial interrogation. When Schultz reveals von Schellenberg's rank and identity, the room erupts. "This is General Major von Schellenberg." Thornton's voice rises with incredulity. "Of the 416th Division." "Yes, sir," Jimmy confirms. "And you captured him, alone, behind German lines." "Yes, sir, with a chicken, sir." The room goes silent. Everyone stares at Jimmy. "With a what?" Thornton finally asks, as Jimmy explains the full story, getting lost, being hungry, sneaking into the farmhouse, throwing the chicken, the accidental capture. Faces around the room shift from skepticism to amazement to barely suppressed laughter. A lieutenant actually has to leave the room to keep from laughing out loud. But Captain David Morrison, the intelligence officer, isn't laughing. He's examining Jimmy's personnel file, and what he's discovered makes his face go pale. He pulls Major Thornton aside, speaks quietly. Thornton's expression darkens. He turns to Jimmy. "Private Caldwell, how old did you say you were when you enlisted?" The jig is up. Jimmy knows it. 16, sir. I lied about my age. If you're finding this story as unbelievable as those officers did, consider subscribing. We research and present the most incredible true stories from military history, stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Now, back to Jimmy's predicament. The room erupts again, but this time with anger. Thornton turns on the recruiting officer liaison. This child fought in combat. He's been behind enemy lines for 2 days. Who the hell let him enlist? Morrison is already radioing division headquarters. The situation is unprecedented. An underage soldier, technically an illegal combatant under military law, has captured a German general. If word gets out, it will expose the systematic failure of recruitment controls across the entire army. It could trigger congressional investigations. Heads will roll. Thornton turns to Jimmy. Son, you might have just caused more trouble than that general ever did. Von Schellenberg, observing this chaos from his guarded corner, allows himself a small smile. The Americans, he murmurs to Schultz, are arguing about paperwork while their child soldier captured us with poultry. This war is truly over. The bureaucratic storm that follows Jimmy Caldwell's accidental capture of a German general reveals a military machine struggling with its own contradictions. For 3 days, Jimmy is held in a command post tent while officers debate what to do with him. The problem isn't just that he's underage, it's that his heroic capture exposes a system-wide failure that commanders desperately want to keep quiet. Division Intelligence Officer Colonel James Harrington arrives to personally interrogate von Schellenberg. The general proves to be an intelligence goldmine. He provides detailed information on German defensive positions, the condition of Wehrmacht units in the Harz Mountains, and, most critically, the locations where senior German commanders are attempting to establish new defensive lines. The 416th Division, he reveals, has effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. The strategic value of this intelligence is immediately apparent. Using von Schellenberg's information, the 83rd Division redirects its advance, captures 3 additional German battalion commanders in 48 hours, and hastens the collapse of German resistance in the sector. Lives are saved. The advance accelerates, all because a 16-year-old farm boy wanted a chicken. Colonel Harrington files his report. The capture of General Major von Schellenberg by Private Caldwell, while unorthodox in execution, has provided intelligence value exceeding that of the previous month's reconnaissance operations combined. Recommend appropriate recognition. But there's a problem. How do you award a medal to a soldier who shouldn't have been in uniform in the first place? The solution comes from an unexpected source: von Schellenberg himself. During his interrogation, the German general makes a formal statement. I have served in 2 world wars. I have surrendered to that boy not because he overpowered me. A chicken is not a weapon of war, but because in that moment I saw the essential absurdity of continuing this fight. Germany has lost. The war is over in all but name. That child's presence on the battlefield, alone and terrified but still functioning as a soldier, demonstrated to me what we have become. We are sending children to die for a cause already lost. My surrender was not cowardice. It was recognition of reality. This statement, translated and filed in official records, provides cover for what happens next. General Alexander Bowling, commanding the 83rd Division, makes a calculated decision. He cannot officially commend Jimmy for capturing von Schellenberg, while acknowledging Jimmy shouldn't have been there. But he can create a narrative that serves everyone's interests. On April 20th, 1945, Jimmy is awarded the Bronze Star, not for capturing a general, but for exceptional courage under fire while conducting reconnaissance operations behind enemy lines. The citation carefully avoids mentioning his age or the circumstances of von Schellenberg's capture. The medal ceremony is low-key, attended only by company officers. But soldiers talk. Word spreads through the division. Within days, everyone knows the real story. That teenage private captured a German general with a chicken. Jimmy becomes a legend. Soldiers who meet him want to shake his hand. He's invited to poker games. Men twice his age call him General Jimmy as a term of affection and respect. The validation comes not from medals or official recognition, but from his fellow soldiers, from men who understand what it means to be lost behind enemy lines, terrified and alone, and still find a way to complete the mission, even if the mission was just finding food. On April 25, 1945, Jimmy's company commander, Captain Robert Hayes, receives him in his tent. Hayes is 26, a veteran of campaigns from Normandy to the Ruhr. He speaks bluntly. "Caldwell, I've been authorized to send you home. Your real age is in your file now. You've done your part. The war's almost over anyway. You can go home a hero." Jimmy, who has spent the last 2 weeks expecting exactly this, surprises himself with his answer. "I'd like to stay, sir, if that's allowed." Hayes studies him. Why? Because Jimmy struggles to articulate something he barely understands himself. "Because I lied to get here. I lied about my age. I shouldn't be here, but I am here, and if I leave now, it feels like all of it. Getting lost, being scared, capturing that general. It feels like it was just an accident. Just luck. I want to finish what I started, the right way." Hayes is quiet for a long moment. Then he nods. "Against my better judgment, and with the unofficial approval of people way above my pay grade who don't want the publicity of sending you home, you can stay. But you're staying back with supply trains. No more frontline duty. That's non-negotiable." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." For the final 3 weeks of the European War, Jimmy serves with the division supply company. He drives trucks. He helps distribute rations. It's unglamorous work, but he does it alongside men who know his story and respect him for it. On May 8, 1945, when Germany surrenders, he's in a supply depot outside Leipzig, helping unload medical supplies. Before we continue to Jimmy's post-war story, I want to thank you for watching. These deeply researched stories take significant time to produce. If you appreciate this level of historical detail and want to support the channel, please hit the like button and consider sharing this video. It helps more than you might think. Now, let's see what happened to Jimmy after the guns fell silent. The impact assessment comes from post-war military analysis. The intelligence provided by von Schellenberg led to the capture of approximately 2,400 additional German soldiers who might otherwise have fought to the death or escaped east to continue resistance. Casualty estimates suggest that the accelerated advance in the 83rd Division sector saved between 300 and 500 American lives. One of those lives belonged to Corporal Thomas Mackenzie of Charlie Company. 40 years later, at a veterans reunion, Mackenzie sought out Jimmy specifically to tell him, "The day you captured that general, my company was supposed to advance into a position he told intelligence about. It was a kill zone. We would have been slaughtered. Instead, we bypassed it. Because of you, I went home to my wife and kids. Because of you, I got to have a life." Jimmy, who never felt like a hero, who always believed his capture of von Schellenberg was just blind luck and circumstance, breaks down crying when he hears this. He's 65 years old, standing in a VFW hall in Kentucky, finally understanding that his 16-year-old self's desperate hunger and accidental courage actually mattered. Von Schellenberg, interviewed by British historians in 1957, offered his own assessment. "That boy taught me more about the nature of modern warfare than any tactical manual. Wars are not won by professional soldiers following carefully laid plans. They are won by ordinary people doing extraordinary things in impossible circumstances. I surrendered to the inevitable that day, not to the boy, but to the future he represented. James Caldwell returned to Kentucky in November 1945, 7 months after VE Day, wearing his Bronze Star and carrying memories that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was 17 years old. He'd been in combat for 3 months, spent 2 days behind enemy lines, and accidentally captured a German general with a chicken. He had nightmares about the ambush that killed his squad for 40 years. In the official records, his capture of von Schellenberg merits exactly 3 sentences in the 83rd Infantry Division's after-action report for April 1945. The age discrepancy in his enlistment is noted in an internal memo that was classified until 1973. For decades, almost no one outside his immediate unit knew the real story. Jimmy never spoke publicly about his service. He attended exactly 1 veterans reunion in 1952 and found he couldn't handle it. Too many memories, too many ghosts. He married Sarah Mitchell in 1948, worked as a machinist at the Ford plant in Louisville for 37 years, and raised 3 children who grew up barely knowing their father had been in the war at all. But the story wouldn't stay buried. In 1983, a military historian researching underage American soldiers in World War II discovered the von Schellenberg incident in declassified archives. He tracked down Jimmy, now 54, and asked for an interview. Jimmy initially refused. It took 2 years of gentle persuasion before he agreed to talk. The interview, published in a military history journal in 1985, finally brought the full story to light. The headline read, "16-year-old private's chicken capture of German general accelerated, end of war in Harz Mountains sector." The story went viral, 1980s style. It was picked up by Stars and Stripes, then Time magazine, then national news. Jimmy, who had spent 40 years trying to forget the war, suddenly found himself at the center of media attention he never wanted. He gave exactly 1 television interview in 1986 to 60 Minutes. When asked if he was proud of what he'd done, his answer surprised everyone. "Proud? I lied to get into the war. I got my whole squad killed because I was too green to know what I was doing. I captured that general by accident because I was hungry and stupid and lucky. The only thing I'm proud of is that I tried to do the right thing after I'd already done the wrong thing. That's all any of us can do." Heinrich von Schellenberg died in 1979 in Hamburg, Germany, having spent the post-war years working as a technical translator. In his personal papers discovered after his death, he'd written about his surrender. "The American boy soldier who captured me represented everything the Third Reich had destroyed: innocence, hope, the future. I saw in his terrified eyes what we had become, what we were asking our own children to die for. History will remember my surrender as a footnote, but for me, it was the moment I chose to stop participating in civilization's suicide." The military legacy of Jimmy's actions extends beyond the tactical intelligence gained. His case became a cornerstone example in post-war reforms of military recruitment. The armed forces established stricter age verification procedures. New regulations required birth certificates to be authenticated by county records offices. The Army implemented cross-checks with school attendance records for recruits claiming to be exactly 18. By conservative estimates, these reforms prevented approximately 15,000 underage teenagers from enlisting during the Korean War. The Caldwell Protocols, as they were informally known among recruitment officers, undoubtedly saved the lives of children who would otherwise have died in uniform before reaching adulthood. Jimmy himself remained ambivalent about this legacy. "I'm glad other kids didn't have to go through what I went through," he told an interviewer in 1991. "But I still wonder sometimes if I did the right thing by staying after they found out how old I was. Maybe I should have just gone home." The techniques Jimmy used, observation, patience, reading terrain, using resourcefulness over firepower, aren't taught in any manual. They can't be. They come from life experience, from growing up poor and rural, from hunting for food when your family is hungry. Modern Special Forces doctrine now acknowledges what commanders learned from soldiers like Jimmy, that unconventional warfare often requires unconventional thinking, and that sometimes the best soldiers are those who don't think like soldiers at all. Today, the chicken incident is taught at the Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, not as a lesson in tactics, but as a case study in how unexpected encounters can produce strategic intelligence. Officers analyzing the case study are asked, what systems should have prevented a 16-year-old from being in this situation? What failures occurred? And how do we balance the genuine value of his intelligence windfall against the moral failure of putting children in combat? There are no easy answers. James Robert Caldwell died on November 3, 2006, at age 77, surrounded by his family in Louisville, Kentucky. His obituary in the Louisville Courier-Journal mentioned his Bronze Star, but not the circumstances that earned it. At his funeral, attended by 200 people, 3 elderly men wearing 83rd Infantry Division caps stood at attention as his casket passed. They were the last survivors of Baker Company who remembered the teenage private who captured a general with a chicken. One of them, Samuel Rodriguez, spoke at the reception afterward. Jimmy never wanted to be a hero. He just wanted to do right by his dad, who died at Pearl Harbor, and his mom, who lost the farm. He ended up showing all of us what real courage looks like. Not the Hollywood version, but the real thing. Being terrified and lost and doing what needs to be done anyway. The lesson of Jimmy Caldwell's story isn't about military tactics or strategic intelligence. It's about the price we ask children to pay for adult failures. It's about how broken systems, inadequate recruitment screening, desperate manpower needs, social pressure to serve, can put 16-year-olds behind enemy lines with 9 weeks of training. And it's about how, even in the midst of that systemic failure, individual courage and basic human decency can still produce something valuable. Jimmy lied about his age to serve his country. His country sent him to die. He survived through luck, hunger, and an absurd encounter with poultry. The general he captured provided intelligence that saved lives. But none of that changes the fundamental truth. He was a child in a war zone, and no amount of medals or historical footnotes can make that right. In his final interview before his death, Jimmy was asked what he wanted people to remember about his story. His answer was simple. Don't let it happen again. Don't send kids to war. We called ourselves the greatest generation, but the greatest thing we could have done was not needed at all. Remember that. The farmhouse where Jimmy captured von Schellenberg still stands outside Halberstadt, Germany. There's no plaque, no marker, just an old building where, for a few minutes in April 1945, the absurdity and tragedy of war collided with a hungry teenager and a German general, and somehow, improbably, impossibly, produced a moment that mattered. History is full of these moments, small encounters with vast consequences, accidents that change outcomes, children forced to become heroes because adults failed to prevent war. Jimmy Caldwell's story is one of thousands like it, most never told, most forgotten, all of them carrying lessons we still haven't fully learned. The chicken, for what it's worth, was never recovered.